Namaskar students, today we were moving to the English lecture 36 and the last in the series on regional organizations. This is on the theories of international cooperation and integration, the third lecture. And it is extremely important because if we want to understand anything on regional organizations, it is very necessary that we understand what is the basis of these organizations and how are they organized. Now, what are alliances? See, in international relations, especially in the realist and neo-realist literature, alliances are one of the most important means of cooperation. In the self-help system, states cooperate with each other in formal or informal arrangements, in alliances and coalitions, enhance their security against actors perceived to pose a threat. Such cooperative relationships extend to other levels of analysis. Groups are formed to enable their members to achieve a shared objective. Alliances are designed to facilitate the attainment of goals. Alliances have usually been formed in international contexts in which conflict or the threat of conflict is present. Theory of alliance behavior, George Liska and William Reike. They agree that alliances and coalitions disband once they have their objective because they are formed essentially against and only derivatively for someone or something. A decision to join an alliance is based on perception of rewards in excess of costs. Each country considers the marginal utility from alliance membership as contrasted with unilateral action. Cohesiveness of an alliance rests on the relationship between internal and external pressures, bearing on the ratio of gains to liabilities for individual allies. Once costs exceed rewards, the decision to realign is made. Nations join alliances for security, stability, and status. A primary requisite for alliance cohesion is the development of an alliance ideology. The function of this is to provide a rationalization for alliance. Theories of alliance behavior. Periodic consultation, especially between a leading member and its allies, both on procedural and substantive issues, contributes to the development and preservation of alliance ideology and thus alliance cohesion. The size of the alliance or coalition must be reduced if additional gains accrue to the remaining participants. Alliances or coalitions are crucial for it to attaining balance of power. Equilibrium is the likely result of the existence of two quasi-permanent blocking coalitions or the presence of such coalitions that play the role of a balancer if a temporary winning coalition sets the stakes too high. The optimum size of alliance. Alliance builders, if they act economically, do not form alliances haphazardly with all available allies. The marginal utility of the last unit of commitment to a particular ally and the last unit of cost in implementing commitments. Size principle, participants create coalitions that are no larger than necessary to achieve their commonly shared objective. If actors have a perfect information, they will form a coalition of exactly the minimum size needed to win. The less complete the information, the larger the coalition contributes to the short span of alliances or coalitions. Rewards from joining an alliance or a coalition, the gains and liabilities associated with alignment can be grouped into pairs, burdens, and gains also with potential for status enhancement and possible losses in capacity for independent action must be balanced. Actors join alliances or coalitions for several reasons. One, to avoid reprisal if they refuse to align themselves. Two, to receive payments of a new kind or another, to obtain promises about policy or subsequent decisions, or to gain emotional satisfaction. Alliances. Alliances usually encompass both small and great powers. Small states join alliances because they must rely fundamentally and to an extent greater than large states on other states. Great powers seek alignment with small states, both for the political and military gains afforded, and also to restrain the latter from certain actions. Smaller powers may prefer to align themselves with a less powerful state or with a combination of lesser states rather than with a great power. Small power alliances are said to provide ineffective instruments if a state's goal is to increase its military strength. Their principal potential value lies in maintaining a local or regional status quo, or in resolving grievances among small powers without outsider great power intervention, provided small powers agree upon themselves. They can make it difficult for a great power to intervene in their region. Alliance formation. Alliance formation in a multipolar system differs substantially from what takes place in a bipolar system, meaning the Cold War period and now the post-Cold War period. Multipolar systems encompassing three or more actors of approximately equal military power, having parallel or common interests but in possession of incomplete information about each other, have an incentive to come to the assistance of each other in the event of an attack by an outside party. This situation arises from the likelihood that free riding or passing the buck may result in a power imbalance if one of the states is defeated and a hegemonic state emerges with even greater power. The relationship between benefits and costs were determined by the relationship between one and those of its likely opponents. The greater the gap between such resources on the part of one state compared with its anticipated enemies, the greater is the incentive to join the alliance. Alliances. Once states join an alliance, there is an extensive and continuing bargaining process designed to maximize shared interest and to cope with security challenges posed by the enemy. Allies have the twin fears of defection and realignment and what has been termed as abandonment and entrapment. Here, this alliance security dilemma leads states to become apprehensive that they will be abandoned in time to need by allies, or that as a result of action taken by an ally, they will be abandoned in time in need of allies, or that as a result action taken by an ally, they will be entrapped into fulfilling their alliance commitments under conditions deemed to be peripheral to their security. This is a perceived trade-off between entrapment and abandonment in which allies seek to maintain an optimal balance. The less the dependence of a state on the alliance for its security, the greater is the state's likelihood of having flexibility of action and bargaining strength within the alliance. Structure and alliances. In bipolar system, alliance formation becomes a simpler process because the structure of the system provides little incentive for defection. Alliances under the conditions of bipolarity are established with a clear understanding of who is the adversary. Thus, the structure of the system provides little or no opportunity for states to defect. Under conditions of bipolarity, moreover, allies could assume diverse strategies and policies towards the common adversary. The potential for fracturing the alliance is far lower under conditions of bipolarity, given the dependency relationships and the absence of alignment alternatives, than in situations of bipolarity. Chain ganging and buck passing. The relative equality of alliance partners in a multipolar system leads each to conclude that its security is inextricably intertwined with all of its alliance partners. Like members of a chain gang, each alliance partner marches to war with an ally whose defeat would greatly diminish its own security. The greater the vulnerability, the greater the propensity to align unconditionally and to defend an ally that is attacked. The less the vulnerability of the state, the greater the likelihood that it will pass the buck or a free ride. When states concluded that they were vulnerable to the offensive capabilities of their enemies, they were prepared to engage in chain ganging behavior. If they concluded that they enjoyed a defensive advantage, they preferred a strategy of buck passing. If they had a choice, they opted to allow other states to assume the cost of balancing. When and why states join alliances? The choice depends on the relative marginal cost of each option. Alliance cohesion and disintegration. How do states respond to threats and the role of alliances in their calculus of security needs? Stephen M. Walt says the quest for a balance to achieve security from a threatening state is far more likely. A state that engages in a balancing policy allies itself with others against a prevailing threat. A state that embraces bandwagoning policy aligns itself with the source of danger. For a state to align with a hegemonic power would be tantamount to placing its trust in the benevolence of the dominant state. Walt contends that only a balancing, more common, but also the stronger state, the greater is likely to be its tendency to balance or ally itself with other threatened states to ensure their survival. The weaker the state, the more likely is it to bandwagon. Such a condition is attributed to the fact that weak states can contribute little to the strength of a defensive coalition. In Walt's formulation, the focus is what is termed a balance of threat rather than balance of power, as the basis for the formulation of alliances at the international level. This is Stephen M. Walt. Stephen Martin Walt, born on July 2, 1955, is an American professor of international relations at Harvard University, John F. Kennedy's School of Government. He belongs to the Realist School of International Relations. He made important contributions to the theory of defensive neorealism and has authored the Balance of Threat book theory. Books that he has authored or co-authored includes Origin of Alliances, Revolution and War, and the Israel Lobby in the US Foreign Policy. In a comprehensive 2005 article, Taming American Power, Walt argued that the US should make its dominant position acceptable to others by using military force sparingly, and most important of all, by rebuilding its crumbling international image. He proposed for the US to resume its traditional role as an offshore balancer, to intervene only when absolutely necessary, and to keep its military presence as small as possible. Now, what is balancing? Walt places emphasis more on intention or ambition rather than simply on power itself as the basis for threat, and thus for the response taken by balancing and bandwagoning states. Hence, arises his preference for what is termed the balance of threat in place of the balance of power as the basic reason for alliance or alignment. because threat perception strongly influences a decision to align as a basis of balancing when the object is defeat of the power posing the greater threat. Ideology and alliances. States with similar political systems have often aligned with each other. The significance of ideology as a unifying factor in alliances diminishing as threat increases. Confronted with a serious challenge to their survival, states are likely to align with each other with little regard to ideological differences. Pragmatic interests prevail over considerations of ideology. States have a tendency to align themselves with ideologically similar states to bolster their internal legitimacy. Security alliances and armaments. Such decisions are based on a calculus of cost, namely what the decision makers must sacrifice in making the necessary choices. Alliances permit a broader sharing of cost of security among several parties. The burden to any one state is likely to what it would be to pay for security in the absence of an alliance. The means available to states are finite. The purchase of armaments, to the extent that it reduces total resources in the civilian economy, represents a cost calculated in the decision to establish to join an alliance. Alliance membership can be expected to carry with it a reduction in the autonomy of the state as a result of the promise of each side contained in the alliance to take specific actions in the event of specific contingencies. Altfeld conditions for equilibrium. Clearly related is the marginal utility of alliance membership to the marginal utility of autonomy. The marginal utility of armaments to the marginal utility of domestic wealth. Dissolution of alliances can occur in 5 circumstances. An increase in the marginal product of armaments, an increase in the marginal utility of autonomy, a decline in the marginal utility of domestic wealth, a decline in the marginal productivity of alliances, or a decrease in the marginal utility of security. Alliances represent formal expressions of commitment as a basis for cooperation. How alliances once formed are maintained and terminated has important implications for the stability of the international system. Promissory obligations contained in alliances may strengthen or contribute to the development of formative premises in support of the binding nature of alliances. The greater the concentration of military capabilities or polarity within the international system, and less likely to be the frequency, scope, and intensity of international conflicts. Alliance disintegration. When interests diverge, such conditions tend to arise in the aftermath of major wars or in periods when the international distribution of power undergoes fundamental change. A diplomatic culture that condones broken promises and the breach of treaties is a culture likely to experience armed conflict. Thus, alliances, to the extent that they produce or reflect normative standards based on commitment and cooperation, provide an important basis for international peace and stability. Alliances based on agreement and consensus for democratic principles endure without the enforced cohesiveness provided by totalitarian ideologies. States that share a similar democratic identity endure, externalize their internal norms when cooperating with each other. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Formed in 1949 with the signing of the Washington Treaty, NATO is a security alliance of 30 countries from North America and Europe. NATO's fundamental goal is to safeguard allies' freedom and security by political and military means. It was formed in 1949 to provide collective security against the threat posed by the former Soviet Union. NATO constitutes a system of collective defense whereby its independent member states agree to mutual defense in response to an attack by any external party. NATO's headquarters are located in Brussels, Belgium, while the headquarters of the Allied Command Operations is near Mons, Belgium. Since its founding, the admission of new member states has increased. The alliance from its original 12 countries has gone up to 30. The most recent member state to be added to NATO was North Macedonia on 27th March 2020. NATO currently recognizes Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine as aspiring members. An additional 20 countries participate in NATO's Partnership for Peace program, with 15 other countries involved in institutionalized dialogue programs. The combined spending of the NATO members constitutes over 70% of the global total. Members agreed that their aim is to reach and maintain the target defense spending of at least 2% of their GDP by 2024. The post-Cold War period. The fall of the Berlin Wall in Germany in 1989, the organization conducted its first military interventions in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995 and later Yugoslavia in 1999 during the breakup of Yugoslavia. Politically, the organization sought better relations with the former Warsaw Pact countries, most of which joined the alliance in 1999 to 2004. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, requiring member states to come to the aid of any member state subject to an armed attack, was invoked for the first and only time after September 11 attacks, after which troops were deployed to Afghanistan under the NATO-led ISAF. The organization has operated a range of additional roles since then, including sending trainers to Iraq, assisting in counter-piracy operations, and in 2011, enforcing a no-fly zone over Libya in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 1973. The less potent Article 4, which merely invokes consultation among NATO members, has been invoked 5 times following incidents in Iraq War, Syrian Civil War, and the annexation of Crimea. The post-Cold War period, the question many people ask is it necessary for the NATO to still exist when the Warsaw Pact has been dissolved? The post-Cold War expansion of NATO came with the German unification on 3rd October 1990, when the former East Germany became a part of the Federal Republic of Germany and the alliance. As part of post-Cold War restructuring, NATO's military structure was cut back and reorganized with new forces such as the headquarters Allied Command Europe Rapid Reaction Corps established. The changes brought about by the collapse of the Soviet Union on the military balance in Europe were recognized in the Adaptive Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, which was signed in 1999. The policies of the French President Nicolas Sarkozy resulted in a major reform of France's military position and in turn to a full membership on 4th April 2009, which also included France rejoining the NATO military command structure while maintaining an independent nuclear deterrent. Russia and the NATO. Russia continues to politically oppose further expansion, seeing it as inconsistent with informal understandings between the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and European and US negotiators that allowed for a peaceful German reunification. NATO's expansion efforts are often seen by Moscow's leaders as a continuation of the Cold War attempt to surround and isolate Russia, though they have always been criticized in the West. A June 2016 Levada poll found that 68% of the Russians think that deploying NATO troops in the Baltic states and Poland, former East Bloc countries bordering Russia, is a threat to Russia. Perceptions from East Europe. In contrast, 65% of the polls surveyed in 2017 by the Pew Research Center. Report identified Russia as a major threat with an average of 31% saying so across all NATO countries, and 67% of polls surveyed in 2018 favor US troops being based in Poland. Of non-CIS East European countries surveyed by Gallup in 2016, all but Serbia and Montenegro were more likely than not to view NATO as a protective alliance rather than a threat. In 2016 study of security argued that NATO enlargement contributed to democratic consolidation in Central and Eastern Europe. France and NATO. France, a founding member of NATO, participated fully in the alliance from the beginning and hosted NATO's first permanent seat in Paris. In 1966, France decided to withdraw from the integrated military command of the alliance. This decision did not in any way call into question the French commitment to participate in the collective defense of the alliance. According to General Charles de Gaulle's formulation, it was a question of modifying the form of our alliance without altering its substance. France's solidarity with its allies did not fade during the Cold War times of tension, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to that of the Euro missiles, during which France supported the deployment of NATO's Pershing missiles in the Federal Republic of Germany in response to deployment of SS-20 Soviet nuclear missiles. France's return to NATO. As we have already said, France in 2009 decision to return to full participation intervened in the context of partial return to NATO military structures from as early as 1995. Ever since the defense ministers participated to ministerial meetings, the chiefs of joint defense staff take part in meetings with their counterparts from the allied countries, and the French military representatives to NATO sit at the military committee. Since then, French officers also serve at the headquarters of the allied forces in Europe, shaped at the operational level headquarters and in some organizations of the Command for Transformation. NATO after the Cold War. It contains in which members have disagreed about how to share the defense alliance burden and how to minimize free riding. Those issues are exemplified by the efforts of the US over the years to press its allies to do more for their own defense, and by fears on the part of the allies that if they further reduce their dependence on the US, the American security commitment could be reduced with detrimental overall effects on European security. At various times, NATO, European allies have been apprehensive that the US might either abandon them or entrap them in conflicts, especially outside Europe, beyond the alliance perimeter, or as they termed, out of the area issues. The alliance has undergone an extensive process of internal adaptation that includes changes in its integrated command structure designed to facilitate its ability to undertake new tasks. Relevance and expansion. Those opposed question the military necessity, political wisdom, and potential consequences of NATO's eastward expansion. They argued that now that the West no longer regarded Russia as an enemy, NATO's enlargement would draw a new dividing line in Europe, aggravate xenophobic nationalistic sentiment in Russia, possibly derail that country's transition to democracy, revive or help to perpetuate a Cold War mindset, and led eventually to another round of costly competition in weapons technology. Expansion supporters. The two world wars of the 20th century both began in Central Eastern Europe. European strategists feared that the Balkans' power keg in the post-Tito era remained a source of dangerous instability with implications that Europe as a whole and NATO could not ignore. Central East Europe as part of the larger Western civilization is moving slowly but steadily toward the process of political and economic integration of the EU. Just as NATO's protective deterrent had provided a safe environment for the strengthening of democracy and the prosperous growth of market economies in the West, so it could now do the same for the former satellite states of the Soviet Union. They warned about Russia's expansionist tendencies, dating back to the Tsars, might survive the demise of communism. Russian fears. The NATO allies at pains tried to minimize an adverse reaction to expansion with Russia. They sought to assure Russian leaders that NATO had no intention, no plans, and no reason to deploy nuclear weapons or substantial numbers of troops and conventional armaments on the territory of new alliance members in East Europe. To give Russia time to adjust, NATO adopted a prudent, measured approach, postponing enlargement toward a more sensitive border states such as the Baltic states. To reduce any possible impression that Moscow was being marginalized, NATO admitted Russia to a consultative role that would enable it to express its views on NATO policy actions without being able to veto them in what is called the Permanent Joint Council, formed in 1997 with Russia as a full member. Integration theory problems. Lacks a commonly accepted definition and a series of agreed indicators for measurement. The question remains whether a rise in transaction precedes, reinforces, results from, or causes integration. It is difficult, if not impossible, to separate the economic and social tasks from the political. That government have often shown themselves unwilling to hand over to international authority tasks that encroach on their political prerogatives. That certain economic and social tasks do not necessarily spill over into the political sector, and that the road to integration lies through bold acts of political will based on ideological or emotional commitment rather than simply through functional integration in economic and social sectors. Technology and economic growth in a shrinking world by themselves will produce integration through functional cooperation, instead designed to reassert ethnic, religious, or national identity as in Islamic fundamentalism of recent decades. So if you see clearly, we have finished off this lecture. We went into, in this third lecture, on what are alliances, how are alliances formed, and then we did an example of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, one of the most successful security alliances, both in the Cold War and in the post-Cold War period. And finally, we finished off this theory, looking at what are the criticisms of this theory that have come about. Next, we'll go into the next theory in our next lecture. Thank you.